front door was locked. The windows were all shut. The alarm had not gone off. And yet, when I walked into my kitchen that Tuesday morning, my coffee mug was on the wrong side of the sink. That's where it started. That's where everything started. Not with a scream, not with a shattered window, not with a shadow in the hallway. It started with a coffee mug moved maybe 8 inches to the left. And if you had told me then what I know now, I would have walked out of that house and never looked back. I would have left the furniture, the clothes, the photographs. I would have left all of it behind and I would have run. But I didn't, because it was just a mug. Because I told myself I was tired, that I must have placed it there without thinking. Because we always give ourselves the most comfortable explanation first. I should have trusted the discomfort instead. My name is Daniel Marsh. At the time of these events, I was 34 years old, recently divorced and living alone in a house I had no business buying on my own. It was a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb of Raleigh, North Carolina. The kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways, and the biggest drama is whose dog got into whose garbage can. I had bought the house with my wife, Sarah, 18 months before the divorce. When she left, she didn't want it. She said the house never felt like hers, that it had always felt more like mine. At the time, I thought that was generous. Later, I wondered if she had sensed something I hadn't. The house was older, built in 1974, which in suburban North Carolina meant it had seen several families, several renovations, and several coats of paint over decisions people didn't want to think about anymore. It was 2 stories, with a finished basement I used as a home office, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and an attached garage that I mostly used for storage. The layout was straightforward. The yard was deep. The neighbors were far enough away that you couldn't see their light from the back windows. I worked remotely as a software consultant, so for most of the week, it was just me. Me, the hum of my computers, and approximately 1,200 square feet of silence. I was used to the silence. I had made a kind of peace with it. For the first several months after Sarah moved out, the house felt enormous, in the way an empty house always does. Full of echoes where there used to be a voice. Full of space where there used to be warmth. But I had settled into it. I had found a rhythm. I knew every sound the house made. The groan of the 3rd stair from the top. The particular whistle of the back window when the wind came from the northeast. The pop and tick of the baseboard. Here's, as they clicked on in the morning. I knew the sounds of this house, the way you know the sounds of your own breathing automatically, completely, without having to think about it. Which is why I noticed when things changed. The coffee mug was a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because Tuesday is when I have my first call of the week at 8:30, and I was already running slightly late. I noticed the mug was on the left side of the sink instead of the right, thought nothing of it, poured my coffee, and went to my desk. The second thing was a Thursday, 2 days later. I came upstairs after a long afternoon of work to make dinner, and when I walked past the living room, I stopped. The couch cushions were in the wrong order. Not dramatically wrong. It wasn't like someone had flipped them or stacked them. It was just that the grey cushion was on the left, and the blue-grey cushion was on the right. But I always kept it the other way around. I had kept it the other way around for a year and a half, because the blue-grey one was slightly firmer, and I preferred it on the right, where I always sat to watch television. I stood in the doorway to the living room for a long moment. I thought about the mug. I thought about the cushions. Then I thought about the fact that I had been sleeping poorly, that I had worked until nearly midnight twice that week, and that exhaustion does strange things to your habits. I switched the cushions back, made dinner, and didn't think about it again until Saturday. On Saturday, I noticed the back door. The back door opened from the kitchen onto a small covered porch, and then from the porch into the yard. There was a deadbolt and a knob lock, and I kept both locked because the neighborhood was quiet, but I was security conscious and had been since college. I was someone who double-checked locks. Not obsessively, I didn't walk back to check them 3 times, but I checked them every night. It was a habit. On Saturday morning, the deadbolt on the back door was unlocked. The knob lock was still engaged. But the deadbolt, the one I always locked last, the one you had to actively turn a thumb, turned from the inside. To engage was in the open position. I remember the feeling that passed through me when I saw it. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like the air in the room got strange, like something had shifted in the atmosphere and my body registered it before my brain had words for it. I stood at the back door for a moment, and then I tested it. I turned the knob and the door opened. Just the knob. The deadbolt was already back. The door just opened. My back porch is not visible from the street. You can't see it from any of my neighbors' houses either. There is a 6-foot wooden privacy fence on both sides of the yard. If someone had come in or out of that door, no one would have seen them do it. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I stood in the kitchen for a while, doing nothing in particular, except breathing and telling myself there was an explanation. And there was an explanation, probably. I had a few friends over 2 Saturdays ago. A small thing for people, beers and pizza. Nothing significant. Maybe in the course of people going in and out of the back porch to smoke, someone had unlocked the deadbolt from the inside, and I hadn't noticed. Maybe I had simply forgotten to lock it that night. Maybe it had been unlocked for 2 whole weeks and I just hadn't checked closely enough to see it. I went around the entire house. Every window, every door. I checked the lock on the door from the garage into the house. I checked the 2 basement windows. I checked the window above the bathroom sink that I sometimes cracked open in warm weather. Everything else was locked and latched. It was just the back door deadbolt. Just an unlocked deadbolt, Isley explained. I went back to what I was doing. But that night, that Saturday night, was the first night I slept badly for a reason I couldn't name. Not the kind of bad sleep that comes from stress or caffeine, or a racing mind. The kind that comes from some animal part of your brain that has noticed something your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. I kept waking up at strange times. 1:14 a.m., 2:52 a.m., 4:07 a.m., and lying in the dark listening. Not to anything specific, just listening. The way you listen when you're not sure whether you heard something or only dreamed it. The house was always quiet when I woke. Just the usual sounds. Just the familiar, known rhythm of the building around me. But I kept waking up anyway. For the next week, nothing happened. Or if something happened, I didn't notice it. I was deep in a project, working long days, eating badly, barely going outside. I existed in a tunnel of code and conference calls and takeout containers. The mug and the cushions and the deadbolt faded into the soft background noise of my anxious mind. Small anomalies explained away and filed. Tired, probably. Then I found the food. There is a pantry off my kitchen, a small walk-in about the size of a large closet. I keep it reasonably organized. Canned goods on the left shelves, dry goods on the right, snacks and miscellaneous in the middle. I know what I have in there because I shop the same way every week and I eat the same things in roughly the same rotation. I am, in the way of people who live alone, a creature of very tight habit. I went to the pantry on a Wednesday night to grab a can of soup, and I noticed that a sleeve of crackers I hadn't opened yet was now half empty. I noticed a can of peanuts that I was certain had been sealed was open, the plastic lid sitting next to it rather than on it. And in the back, behind some boxes, there was a plastic bag of almonds, something I had bought in bulk months ago. A mostly forgotten about that had been opened and was significantly lighter than I expected. I stood in the pantry doorway holding my soup can and staring at the almonds. I thought, mice. I thought, you haven't been in the back of the pantry in weeks. Those almonds could have been like that since before you even noticed them. I thought, crackers go stale and you probably opened that sleeve and forgot about it. I thought, peanut. Cans don't always seal perfectly. The lid was probably never fully on. I thought all of those things. And then I thought about the mug on the wrong side of the sink, the cushions in the wrong order, the unlocked deadbolt. My skin went cold in a way I didn't like at all. I put the soup back. I wasn't hungry anymore. I went around the house again, the same check I had done 2 weeks before. Every window and every door. Everything was locked. Everything was closed. I went down to the basement and checked the windows down there, both of them, checking the latches with both hands, making sure. I checked inside the closets. I checked under the beds upstairs, which felt ridiculous, but I did it anyway, because the alternative was not sleeping, and at least looking felt like I was doing something. Nothing. No one. Every room empty, every space accounted for. I went to bed at 11, lay in the dark, and stared at the ceiling for a long time, and I made a decision that I felt, even at the time, was probably already too late. I decided I would start paying closer attention. I want to try to explain what the next few days were like, because I think if I don't explain it carefully, it sounds like paranoia. Like a man alone in a big house who started to scare himself. And maybe some of it was that. Maybe. But I want you to understand the quality of what I was feeling. The particular texture of that growing unease. Because it wasn't the sharp fear of seeing something jump out of the dark. It was quieter. And much worse than that, it was the feeling of wrongness. Persistent, small, undeniable wrongness. On Thursday, the hand soap in the downstairs bathroom had been used. This sounds absurd. I know it sounds absurd. But I almost never used that bathroom myself. It was the guest bathroom and I had no guests. The pump on the soap dispenser was significantly lower than it should have been, low enough that I noticed it, low enough that I could not explain it with a vague sense of maybe I used it without thinking, because I genuinely never went into that bathroom. On Friday, the shower mat in the main bathroom upstairs was damp. I had showered that morning, but I had hung the mat over the tub edge the way I always did after showering, and by evening it should have been completely dry. It was not completely dry. It was damp in the middle in a way that suggested it had been stepped on again within the last few hours. I stood in the bathroom holding the edge of the damp shower mat, and I felt, for the first time since this had started, something that was unambiguously fear. Not the vague, Defensible anxiety I had been sitting with for the past 3 weeks. Fear, the kind that comes from your body, before it comes from your mind. Someone had been in my house, was in my house, had used my shower. I put the mat down. I walked out of the bathroom. I walked very carefully down the hallway to the top of the stairs, and I stood there, and I listened with every part of my attention, and the house was silent. The house was absolutely, completely, deathly silent. I went back into the bedroom, and I locked the bedroom door. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I thought about calling the police. I really did. But what was I going to say? My shower mat is damp. Someone might be eating my crackers. Nothing is broken, nothing is missing. There is no evidence of forced entry, and I have no idea if anything is actually wrong. I went back and forth on it for what felt like a long time, but was probably only about 15 minutes, and I decided, another bad decision in a series of them, to look first, to see if I could find something real before I made a call I was afraid would make me sound unhinged. I searched the house again, top to bottom, every room, every closet. I opened the door to the spare bedroom and walked through it, checked the closet. I checked the third bedroom, which I use for storage, boxes stacked against the wall, an old folding table, a broken lamp I'd been meaning to throw away. I checked the bathroom again, the main one and the guest one. I went downstairs, checked the living room, the dining room, the kitchen. I went into the pantry and looked carefully at everything on the shelves. Then I went to the basement. The basement was my office, and it was the room I knew best, the room I spent the most hours in, every day. I went down the stairs and I turned on the light, and I looked around, and for a moment everything seemed exactly as I'd left it. My desk and monitors against the far wall, the shelving unit with my equipment, the small couch I kept for the au pair. Days when I needed to think lying down, and then I saw the couch. There was a depression in the cushion. Not a dramatic one, not the obvious imprint of a body, but a softening in the middle cushion that I recognized. In the way you recognize things that live in your own house as being different from how it had looked that morning when I sat. On the couch, I always sat on the right. The depression was in the middle. I stood there in the basement for a long, terrible moment, and then from directly above my head, from the kitchen floor above me, there was a sound, a footstep one. Footstep. Clear, unmistakable. The specific crick of weight on the floorboards in a specific spot that I knew intimately because I walked across it every day. Someone was upstairs in my kitchen, right now, while I was standing in the basement. The next. Few seconds are difficult to describe in the correct order, because fear does something to time it, stretches certain moments, and compresses others, and the sequence of things becomes jagged and strange. What I can tell you is that I did not go upstairs immediately. I stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, and I could not make myself move. I listened. The kitchen above me was silent after that one footstep, dead silent, after a long moment. I don't know how long, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. I went up the stairs slowly, holding the railing, and pushed open the door from the basement to the kitchen. The kitchen was empty. I stood in the doorway looking at every part of the kitchen, and it was empty. The back door was closed. The door to the garage was closed. The room was still and undisturbed, except for the back door deadbolt. It was unlocked again. I called the police. I know I should have called them earlier. I know that now, of course. But I called them that night, from the back porch. with the door open so I could see the kitchen while I talked, and I described everything I had noticed over the past 3 weeks. The moved objects, the food, the damp shower mat, the footstep I had heard, the unlocked deadbolt. The dispatcher was professional and kind, and she sent a patrol car within. 15 minutes. 2 officers came through the house with me. They checked everything, the kind of thorough, practiced check that made my own searches feel embarrassing. In comparison, they went through all the same spaces I had, and they also checked things I hadn't thought to check. The crawl space access panel in the hallway closet, the access hatch in the back of the master bedroom closet that led to the attic, the space beneath the built-in shelving in the basement. They did not find anyone. But one of the officers, a heavy-set guy in his 40s, Officer Reyes, he told me his name, found something I had completely forgotten was in my house. He opened the door under the basement stairs, the small triangular storage space that I had completely stuffed with boxes from my move and subsequently never opened again. And he looked inside with his flashlight, and he turned to me and asked if I'd been in there recently. I told him I hadn't been in there in probably 6 months. Maybe longer. He looked at me and then looked back at the space and said, "Some of these boxes have been moved." I couldn't see what he meant at first, but he pointed it out. 3 of the boxes nearest the door had been shifted slightly, pulled forward enough that if you crouched inside the space and wanted to look out toward the basement through the gap under the door, you could. The boxes had been arranged very carefully to create a narrow sight line through the crack under the door. I felt the blood leave my face. Officer Reyes asked me what was in the boxes. I told him they were mostly things from my marriage books. Some kitchen items Sarah hadn't wanted, old files, things I hadn't opened since the move. He asked if he could move some of them, and I said yes, and he carefully shifted boxes and shone his light into the back of the space, and it was empty. No one was there. No one had been there recently. There was a thick layer of dust, except around the boxes that had been moved. He took photographs. Both officers were more serious after that, less dismissive, more careful with their words. They told me they were going to note everything and flag it, and that I should consider having the locks changed and adding additional security. They didn't say what they thought had happened. They didn't say the word I was thinking, but they gave me the number of a detective and told me to call if anything else occurred. After they left, I stood in my living room alone and I thought about the boxes under the stairs, about the narrow gap they had been arranged to look through, about the fact that someone had been down there in that space in my basement and had been looking out, had been watching. Watching what? Watching me work at my desk 20 feet away. Watching me sit on the couch and think. Watching me spend my days in my own basement office, completely unaware that I was not alone. For how long? That was the question I couldn't stop turning over. For how long had this been happening? I did not sleep that night. I sat in my bedroom with the door locked and the overhead light on, and I did not sleep at all. I had the locks changed the next morning. Every exterior lock, the deadbolts and the knob locks, the lock on the garage access door, and the padlock on the crawlspace panel, which I had the locksmith add because there had never been one before. I also bought 2 things, a security camera system for cameras, and a solid wooden chair that I wedged under the basement door handle every night before I went to bed, because there was no lock on that door and I couldn't sleep with it unlocked. I also, for the first time in the weeks since all of this began, told someone what was happening. My brother, Marcus, who lived 2 hours away in Charlotte. I called him and told him everything, from the mug to the boxes under the stairs, and there was a silence on the other end of the phone that I had not expected. Not the silence of disbelief. The silence of someone absorbing something that is genuinely frightening. He offered to come stay with me. I told him I was okay, that the locks were changed, that the cameras were going up. He made me promise to call him every night until I felt safe, and I promised. We talked for a long time. That evening, and having another voice, a real, warm, familiar voice, helped in ways I didn't fully expect. I had been alone with this for 3 weeks, and I hadn't understood, until I stopped being alone with it, how much that had worn me down. The cameras went up on a Sunday. 4 of them, 1 covering the front door, 1 the back door and porch, 1 in the corner of the basement angled to cover the entire room, including the space under the stairs, and 1 in the upstairs hallway covering all 3 bedroom doors and the top of the stairs. The app on my phone gave me live feeds and motion-triggered recording. I went through the setup 3 times to make sure I understood it. For 3 days. Nothing happened. Nothing on the cameras. Nothing moved. No sounds in the night. I began to sleep again. Not well, but some. I began to breathe a little easier. I allowed myself to think that whoever it had been that changed locks had locked the mount. That it was over. On Wednesday night at 11:51 p.m., the motion sensor on the basement camera went off. I was in bed, half asleep, when my phone buzzed with the alert. I picked it up with my heart already accelerating and opened the app. With fingers that weren't quite steady, and I looked at the feed. The basement was empty. The lights were off and the image was in night vision grey, and I could see everything clearly, my desk, my monitors, the couch, the shelving unit. The door to the storage space under the stairs was closed, exactly as I had left it. Everything was exactly as I had left it. But the camera had triggered. Something had moved. I sat up in bed and stared at the feed for 4, 5, 6 minutes. Nothing moved. The room was completely still. I had the chair wedged under the basement door handle, so no one could have come up the stairs. Every door in the house was locked with brand new locks. There was no way anyone was in the house. I told myself it was a spider, a large bug walking across the lens. False alarms happen with motion sensors all the time. I put the phone down and I lay back down and stared at the ceiling. Then my phone buzzed again. The downstairs hallway camera had triggered. I sat back up. I opened the app. I switched to the hallway camera and I looked at the image, and everything in the hallway was still and empty, and my heart was hammering so hard. I could feel it in my throat. And then the image blurred. Not a blur from motion. Something had come very close to the camera. Something was directly in front of the camera. Too close for the lens to focus. Close enough that the image was just a smear of darkness. And then the camera feed went black. Someone had covered the camera. I got out of bed. My hands were shaking. I picked up my phone and I called 911 and I said, there is someone in my house right now. I need officers immediately. And I read them my address and I stayed on the line the way the dispatcher told me to, and I went to the bedroom window and looked down at the street. While I was on the phone, I heard the basement door. I heard the wooden chair, the one I had, wedged under the handle, scrape against the floor. A slow, deliberate sound. Not a bang, not a crash. Just a slow, patient scrape. Like something testing the resistance from the other side. I stopped breathing. The scraping stopped. the house went silent. I stood at the window with the phone at my ear and the dispatcher's voice in my ear asking me to stay calm. Officers were on the way. Could I see the street? And I looked down at the empty midnight street and I said yes. I can see the street. And I watched the blue and red lights appear at the far end of the block. 2 minutes later, that felt like 2 hours, for officers this time. They searched the house in a way that my word search doesn't come close to describing. It was systematic and thorough, and they were completely serious from the moment they walked in. They found the basement camera knocked off its mount, the lens covered with a piece of black electrical tape that had been placed over it from the inside. They found the hallway camera in the same condition. When they moved the chair away from the basement door and went downstairs, they found the basement window latch. The latch on one of the 2 basement windows had been tampered with. The previous week, when the locksmith had come to change the exterior locks, neither of us had checked the basement window latches because the windows were on the exterior and both appeared to be latched from the outside. But this one, the one on the left side of the basement, behind the shelving unit, had had its latch modified. The latch was in the closed position visually, but the mechanism had been manipulated so that it didn't actually catch. If you knew how it had been done, you could push the window open from the outside. Someone had prepared a way back in. That was what stopped me. Not the fear I was past the point where my fear could peak at new information. What stopped me was the word that the detective used when he explained this to me later. He said the word prepared.